Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Hello again, everybody, and welcome. My name is Mark from RIPIN. I am joined this morning by Jennifer Kaufman, Ruth Gallucci, and Deborah Maslin. They're going to talk to you all about early intervention, transitioning to early childhood special education. This webinar, I want you all to know, is being recorded, and you will actually receive a link to the recording as soon as it's over, as well as a copy of the slides used in today's presentation and some other links to helpful resources. So if at any point you have questions throughout the presentation, our presenters are going to do their best to answer those questions at the end. But as they occur to you, feel free to type them into the chat box here on Zoom. And we will be monitoring those and, as I said, doing our best to answer them as we get to the end of the webinar. Other than that, I think that that's it from me. So I am going to turn it over now to Deborah.
Good morning, everyone, and we're so happy that you're all here today to learn a little bit more about a family's experience from transitioning from early intervention into early childhood special education. This webinar is designed to speak to families directly. If you are a professional working with families, this is also very, very useful information as you communicate all of these things with families. Ruth, if you could advance the slide. We have with us today, as Mark said, we have Jen Kaufman from our early intervention system and Ruth Gallucci from the early childhood special education system. And the agenda. Basically, first of all, I'd like to do, to make sure we have a disclaimer out there. We realize that we're in the middle of a pandemic and that many of us, including myself, are waiting on the edge of our seats to find out what is our child going to do this fall. You know, you may have heard from your school system, you may have not. This webinar is not designed to answer those questions. We are basically, this webinar is designed to let you know what the regulations are, what is the process, the normal process from transitioning from early intervention into an early childhood special education setting. And I think that we need to keep that in mind. If you do have particular questions about a particular school system, we are not going to be able to answer those today. Again, like Mark said, please put any questions into the chat box. We will be unmuting people at the end of this discussion if we have if we have enough time at the end of the webinar. And I'm going to be keeping a careful, close eye on the questions. And if we start having a lot of the questions that need clarifying, I will sort of derail the webinar and ask those questions in real time. Otherwise, we'll wait to the end. So I'm going to turn this over now to Ruth.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks Deb and thanks Mark. I'm happy to be with you today. I am Ruth Gallucci and I coordinate early childhood special education services at the Rhode Island Department of Education. So let's start with what is early childhood special education, or what we call ECSE. So as you know, early intervention are services that support families of eligible infants and toddlers birth to 3 years old so they can help their children develop to the fullest potential. Early childhood special education are services or supports for eligible 3 through 5 year olds so their unique needs can be met and they can be prepared for further education, employment, and independent living down the road. Early childhood special ed, or ECSE, is simply an age range. It's important to recognize that all of the requirements of special education, the protections and supports, are all the same, whether your child's 3 through 5 or school age or beyond. So as families are familiar in early intervention, early infants and toddlers learn best from their favorite adults in places that are familiar and comfortable, when they have multiple opportunities to practice skills throughout their days, throughout their daily routine. Most EI services are provided in the natural environment through a family coaching model, not a medical or therapeutic model. Well, likewise, early childhood special education services was never intended to be a place. So special education refers to specially designed instruction, in which you are adapting the content of what children are learning, the methodology or the delivery of instruction, ensuring that children can access the general education curriculum so that each child can meet the educational standards that apply to all children. And special education is provided in what we call the least restrictive environment, similar to the natural environment. The least restrictive environment is usually that general education environment. So when we talk about planning for transition, I'm going to turn it over to Jen Kaufman, who will take over from here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Kaufman, and I am the Part C coordinator for Rhode Island. And what that means is I oversee early intervention services in the state, and I work at the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. Some of you probably know, look very familiar names on the list of attendees. I've worked in early intervention for doing direct work for about 17 years before coming to this job. So I have a lot of familiar with transitioning lots of children and supporting families through that process. And so you can connect, you can go to the next one. I don't know how to do this, like next. There are some early intervention resources. So for the providers, professionals that are on our webinar today, if you go to the Sherlock Center website, there's a link at the bottom of this slide. There are some different resources that we use to support families through the transition process. So when we start thinking about transitioning children to, can I see the whole slide? Thanks. You know, even before we think about transitioning or if a child's potentially eligible for special education services at age 3, there's some other things that we want to support families and help you consider. One thing is, you know, to consider, is there an early childhood education program? Just to remember that early childhood education, that we want to make sure that we're providing learning opportunities for all children, not just children in early intervention, not just children in early childhood special education, but all children should have access to that support. Again, as you know, Ruth mentioned, special education is not a place, it's a service to support children in that learning environment. And one of the things that we're, you know, as early intervention providers, we want to support families to consider an early childhood program in your community in case your child does require special education services, because then these services can happen. You know, the special education program can work with your early childhood program to ensure that your child has what they need there. Next. So there does come a time where our families have to say goodbye to early intervention. And for some families, this can be a very very nerving time, because what happens next? So just as everybody knows that we provide services up until the day before a child's 3rd birthday. And our goal is to, if a child's eligible for special education services, that their services will start on their 3rd birthday. So when we think about transition, it's, you know, the movement or passage from one thing to another. And sometimes that change is, you know, is hard for people. Sometimes it's, like I said, it's kind of nerve-wracking, but your early intervention providers are there to help you through this process. And special education services are a little different than early intervention services. So it's our job to make sure that we provide you with a smooth transition. That's what we like to call it, so that it's seamless and that you have all the information that you need and you have the support you need for the next system. So there's a lot of planning that goes into that prior to when your child turns 3. I see all the things on the slide. So one of the things that the early intervention providers should be helping families think about is, you know, are you already participating in an early care education center? Is there some place that you're already very comfortable with in your community? And would you like your child to continue in that program? So that's a question that needs to be asked. If your child is not participating in that type of setting, is that something that you want for your child? You know, maybe your child's siblings have gone someplace that you were very happy with. Where might your child attend, thinking about if your child didn't have a disability or a delay, where would your child go? Probably the same place as the siblings. And then, Ruth always likes me to say that it's very important to try to stay within your district because it makes things a lot easier. And these conversations really should start even prior to transition and not wait for just the whole special education meeting time for this, because there are a lot of opportunities for children in early intervention to participate in early care and education programs that are high quality, that can help support their development. So something to consider. As we already said that, if you're a parent, you're like, I don't even know where to look. Your early intervention team can help you find a high quality early care and education program in your community. And there is a really great resource. You can click on this link. ECSE has listings of all the childcare centers and their Bright Star ratings, which Bright Star is a quality rating scale. So you can look up any child care and see what's going on in that program to help you make good decisions for your child. Also, your early intervention person, your provider, if funding is an issue, you're like, how am I going to afford this? You may be eligible for some state funding or other means. So that's something that your early intervention provider can help you research. So then once you decide, yes, maybe you decide, yes, I would like my child in an early care and education program. But then the thing that we need to think about is, think about how will your child interact with the education and the setting and the environment, and will your child potentially need support? And this is where our preschool special education services through your local school department or some home visiting services could help support your family after age 3. So that's the big question, really thinking about, will your child potentially need support? We don't have to decide now, yes or no, but if we think it's a potential need, then we're going to move on with this transition process to special education. So where do we even begin? It's like, oh, this is crazy. This is so overwhelming. So what happens typically in early intervention when your child's around 27 months old? And I know that seems like a long time before they turn 3, but there's a lot of work that we need to do before your child turns 3 to ensure that smooth process. Your early intervention team will start just talking about this whole process with you as I'm doing today, and give you information about it. And then maybe at that time, if your child's not in an early care an education setting, that might be a topic of conversation that you'll have, and start looking for a place if that's something that you're interested in. And then one of the other things that your EI team will do is that they will talk to you about your rights, the whole process, and information to kind of, as a team, help decide if your child might require special education services and may be potentially eligible. Another thing that we do right at the beginning is around this 27 months old, and sometimes a little earlier, your early intervention team might start talking to you about this. You'll have about a month to think about it. And your early intervention team can help answer questions for you, can help you make the decision whether to move forward with figuring out if your child is potentially eligible for special education services. And most families do pursue this process to see if their child is eligible for these services. So how do we even know if your child may require special education services and might be considered potentially eligible? Well, there are a lot of things that we think about. Your early intervention team is going to help you review your child's current skills, progress, and needs as compared to other children their age. And there are some things that they will help you consider. What are your child's current functional skills and behaviors? Are they expected for a child this age, or are your child's skills like that of a much younger child? So that's one thing that your EI team should be talking to you about at this time. And if so, if the skills, you're like, yeah, the skills of my child are like that of a much younger child, then the next question to think about is, will your child potentially require some supports in special education to be able to learn and have access to the general education as other children? And so just making sure that your EI team also speaks with you about the early intervention and special education eligibility are a bit different. There are a little bit more strict rules around special education than for early intervention. So let's talk about that for a minute, about special education eligibility. Am I still on my right slides? We're good? Yeah, okay. So for special education eligibility, that your child must be evaluated in accordance with the regulations. And keep clicking. And then your child must be determined to meet criteria in one of the identified categories, and your child must require special education related services, which Ruth is going to go into more detail in a little bit on that. And then on the right-hand side, these are the identified categories that, most children actually become eligible based on developmental delay. If you see right at the bottom, I would say that would be, I don't know, Ruth, would you say like 90% of the kids come under that category, or?
Not quite that high, Jen, but I would say about 75-80% of the kids.
Yeah, so most kids just, which is a general developmental delay, it's not a specific diagnosis, you're just showing that you are, that your child has functional skills like that of a much younger child at that point. So the developmental delay is defined, this is the definition, and this gets a little, I know, technical, but we wanted to share with you the information so that you know what we're talking about when we speak of developmental delay. So basically, it is, as it said here, defined as 25% delay or a score equal to or greater than 2 standard deviations below the mean. So what does that mean? What that means is that your child's functional skills are like that of a much younger child, but based on some type of standardized testing and tool to demonstrate that delay. And it could be in one of these areas, 2 standard deviations, or they could have 1.5 standard deviations in 2 of these areas of development. So additional eligibility guidelines. Children, one thing that we want to stress, Ruth and I always like to stress, is that children with a social emotional delay are eligible if they meet the criteria. So that can be a category of delay for eligibility for special education services at 3. They do not need to demonstrate a cognitive delay. It can be just a social emotional delay. The other thing to think about is your child might be eligible for early intervention because they have a medical diagnosis. Now, when we think about the next system, just that medical diagnosis does not determine eligibility for preschool special education. You still have to demonstrate that there's a delay in one of those areas of development. And so when we talk about eligibility for special education at age 3, you're eligible for special education at age 3. You're not eligible for a specific service at that time, like speech therapy or a classroom. So when we're talking about this, one thing to keep in mind is the first step is just to determine, is my child even eligible for special education? And then, which Ruth will get into after, then you decide which services and supports will help to support your child's development and learning. And then also, depending on once you're found eligible, your child's found eligible, and in that big list of categories that we just showed you, just because whatever the category is does not determine or restrict the type or the amount of service that you'll receive. So just because you are eligible under developmental delay doesn't mean you can only have speech services or only have because you're under the developmental delay category does not mean that necessarily you're eligible to be in a classroom. Like, that's not what it means. So we have to really think about, the first step is just determining if my child is eligible for special education. And then the next step is to really look at, what does this child need, and what services and type of services and amount of services are really going to help them with their educational development. So that was just a little bit, I'm sure I botched that right up, Ruth, but trying to talk about Ruth's world. But we'll go back to early intervention. And so what happens, I have that month to decide. I'm a parent, I have that month to decide. And my team and I say, you know what? I think that my child might be potentially eligible for preschool special education services. So if this is what your team decides, there's a lot of different ways that we can go here. So the most common is this: yes, we decided that my child might be potentially eligible. So what your service coordinator will do is they send a notification to your local school department before or within the month that your child turns 28 months old. So say your child is born on May 5th, they have the whole month of May to send in that notification. And this form notifies your local education, that your local school department, to let them know that you want to begin that process. Okay, that's all you're committing to right now. You're beginning to commit to that process to determine if your child is eligible for special education services, which would begin when your child turns 3. You do not need to give consent for the notification, but what you do need to give consent for is for the early intervention team to send in important papers to help support this process. So some things that your early intervention service coordinator may send to your local school department is your IFSP and all the information in that, any relevant assessment information, and something that I think we might talk about a little later. It's called the Child Outcome Summary Form, which actually the Child Outcome Summary Form, I think we're going to talk about that in a minute. So I'll just have Ruth do the next slide.
Hey, Jen, just before we move on, can you just, just in case there's anybody on the line who doesn't know what IFSP means?
Oh, sorry. That is your, as a parent, that is your individual family service plan that you develop with early intervention when you are begin your time with early intervention. So it outlines all of the services, all of your goals, everything that you're going to be working on, and information about your child. So if you remember, you have that document outlines all that for you for early intervention, and that's very helpful for the preschool special education folks to take a look at it to see what your journey has been. So this is what the notification and consent form looks like. It just has some basic information you can see at the top, and then you can see where the parent signature is, and those are the service coordinator will just check off the things that they're going to send along with this notification with your permission. And there's something else that you can think about. You don't have to go through with this process, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So you can see in the middle of the form that there's a chance for you to opt out of this notification, and you do have that option. I'm going to talk about that in just one second. And the next slide. This is the Child Outcome Summary Form that you'll become familiar with your early intervention team. And what this is sort of like just a little report with your input about what are all the things that your child's doing right now, and thinking about all the functional skills that your child has in relation to other children their same age. So it's a nice little report that gets sent over to with your notification to let the preschool special education team know, what's your child doing right now, and it helps them begin to see a really nice picture of what your child is able to do, what they like, and possibly what they're going to need in the future. So what happens now? This can happen also. My team says, you know what? we think that your child might be potentially eligible, but you're not feeling it. You don't want to do it. You don't feel like this is something that you want to pursue. Well, you have that choice. And so on that form that I just showed you, you'll sign to the opt-out of this process. And that's what you'll do. And you can change your mind. So if in another couple months you say, you know what, I think I made a wrong decision, I'd like to start to pursue this again. Well, you can do that. You let your service coordinator know, and then you can opt back in at any time. But just understand that if you do opt back in, the later or the closer to your child's third birthday, this could, your timelines for making sure that you have services directly at age 3 could be delayed a little bit, especially if you opt back in after your child is 33 months old. You know, however, or your early intervention and your school department will make every effort to make sure that you do have that transition, but it could be delayed. Just wanted to let you know that if you do opt back in late. So there could be a situation where maybe my EI team and I decide that really my child's not potentially eligible, so we're not going to pursue this. This will be designated on the form. And then the thing that early intervention should be responsible for assisting you with is setting up any supports and services that you have, so that you have what you need when your child turns 3. So maybe it's connecting you to an early care and education program. Maybe there's another home visiting program that you might be eligible for. Maybe there's just some kind of medically related appointments that you might need, or doctors that you might need that have nothing to do with your child's development. It might be just medical. But those are the things that early intervention can help you with, so that when you turn 3, even though you might not be going on to the preschool special education system, you do have access to some community resources that you might need. And the last situation that does happen sometimes your early intervention team might say, you know what, we really don't think that your child's potentially eligible, but you might disagree with it. You might say, you know what, I disagree with you. I would like to pursue this. Well, you have that right to do that, and your early intervention team will help you do that. And so you could be in the middle of this process and decide, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Well, you can stop the process at any time. You just have to let your service coordinator and the school department know in writing, and you can stop the process. And now I'm going to turn it over to, oh, no, is this me still? Okay, it's me still. Okay, so now what happened is that we've made this decision that we're going to pursue this process. Okay, so that's the point that we're at now. So now we actually start beginning this transition to preschool special education. All children do transition out of early intervention, but we're going to focus on the group of kiddos that are going to pursue eligibility with preschool special education now. So this actually process takes over, a 6-month period of time. So, and it does really take that much time to make sure that we're considering everything we need to consider. And the purpose of this time is to really work together with early intervention, with your family, and early child special education team to really make sure that we're considering everything and that we have a timely process, and making sure that children who need services are going to get those services by their 3rd birthday. So the first there's going to be a series of meetings that we're going to have throughout this process. There's actually 4 different meetings. The first meeting is early interventions responsibility. So we have the first meeting is early interventions responsibility, and the next 3 are the responsibility of your school district. Okay, your local education agency. So I'm going to speak to the transition conference meeting, which like I just said, is early interventions responsibility. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ruth, and she's going to discuss the next 3 meetings and the process with these meetings with your school district. So transition conference, this is, sometimes you might hear it as called the transition meeting. Either way, this is the first meeting, formal meeting that we have in our transition process. After the notification has been sent, your service coordinator will work with you and your school district to schedule what we call this transition conference. And it has to be before or during the month your child turns 30 months of age. So if your child turns 30 months, on May 5th, that has to happen in the month of May. This meeting really should be at a time and location that's convenient for your family. I would say right now, I'm pretty sure they're all Zoom meetings or on the phone, doing things a little different right now because of COVID. And your early intervention service coordinator, if we were in school right now and in a non-COVID time, your early intervention service coordinator could help arrange transportation or language support for your family if you need it for this meeting. And the purpose of this meeting, well, we have a couple of things we need to sort of get done at this meeting and we need to talk about. It's really a really nice time for you and your early intervention team to share information about your child with your school department, the representative who is going to represent your school. If you haven't already discussed it, it's a good time to talk about different early care and education programs that you might be considering if your child is not already there, or if they are already involved in one, you can talk about how your child is doing in that setting. It's a really great time for you to learn about your specific school district special education referral process. They're all kind of the same but different. So you really want to know specifically what your town does. And then the document that comes out of this meeting to sort of that documents everything that happened and all the decisions that were made is called the individual transition plan. And this includes, very importantly, includes next steps for what you're going to need to do, what you're responsible for, what your early intervention team is responsible for, and what your school department is responsible for, so that you can ensure a smooth transition by your child's 3rd birthday. So it'll all be outlined in this document. So this is what it looks like. The formal name is transition preparation steps, but a lot of times you will hear it referred to as the transition plan. So as you can see, it has on the left-hand side activities for your child and family. So these are the things that you're going to do. And on the right-hand side are activities for either early intervention, your school department, or sometimes your early childhood program. So if you're involved in a child care center, maybe they might have a responsibility for this transition as well. And if your child is already involved in a child care center or preschool program, it's very important to make sure that they're included, because they do provide a lot of valuable information to this process as well. So we can move forward. And now I am going to turn it over. I'm sure you're sick of listening to me talk. Ruth, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jen. So as Jen mentioned and talked about that first transition meeting, which is an early intervention meeting, after that, the school districts take over. And I realize we need to explain the LEA acronym. So LEA just means Local Education Agency. It's just a fancy way of saying your school district. So sorry about that. So there are 3 meetings that you will take part in if you get that far. So the first 2 are evaluation team meetings. The first one is to review the referral that comes from early intervention. Jen talked about the notification. The notification is the same as a referral. The second one is to get together and determine special education eligibility for services. And then if your child is eligible, to hold an individualized education program meeting, which we call an IEP. So let's start with the evaluation team meeting, or the ET meeting, to review the referral. So at that first meeting, it usually happens in the beginning of that 6-month transition period that Jen mentions. You will be in a meeting with professionals from the school district, including a gen ed teacher, a special ed teacher, if your child has speech needs, a speech therapist or an occupational therapist. and someone representing the school district, and you as a parent, of course. The purpose in this first meeting is to determine if special education evaluation is needed, and if so, to determine what that evaluation looks like. What information is needed to make that eligibility decision at the next meeting. So what typically happens at this first ET meeting, we're reviewing the early intervention IFSP. We're talking about any functional skills and behaviors that your child has. And Jen showed you that form that we call the Child Outcome Summary Form, or the COSA. I apologize for all these acronyms. The school districts will be reviewing any previous evaluations or reports you might bring to the table. You'll have an opportunity to share any information that you have specifically about your child, any concerns you have, any questions that you have at this point. The team will determine if evaluations is necessary. And the way that they determine that is if there is any suspicion of disability or developmental delay, they will move forward and look towards that evaluation. If there's no suspicion of a disability or delay, if all the paperwork brought to the table indicates that your child is doing well, maybe in the low average range, but well within where he should be for his age, the team may say there's really no suspicion of a disability and we're not going to go forward. Parents are required to provide consent for any evaluations that are planned. So if the school district is going to do an evaluation, they will have to ask for your signature before they can implement those evals. So that's really what happens at that first meeting. The second meeting, so after these evaluations have taken place, sometimes they include an observation of your child, either at home or in his school, if he's already in school. After everything takes place, you're going to come back and have a second ET meeting or evaluation team meeting. And the purpose in this meeting is to determine special education eligibility. So what does that look like? So by law, the districts will have you back at the table within 60 days of your parent consent or when you consented for that evaluation. Again, you'll have the same players at the table that you had last time. And as we mentioned, the purpose being to determine whether your child meets the eligibility criteria for one of those disability categories. And as Jen mentioned earlier, we don't just look at a medical diagnosis, we're looking at whether your child requires special education services to learn. So what usually happens at this second ET meeting? We're going to be going over all of the components of the evaluation, discussing those in detail. We have something called the COSB, which is just the Child Outcome Summary second part. And that looks at all those functional skills that were discussed at the first meeting and we think about how those skills compare with other children your child's age. Is your child functioning very close to where other children are functioning? Is your child way below other children his age? It gives us a lens other than the formal evaluations to really talk about how your child's functioning at home and in the community and if in school. You will provide, I'm sorry.
I'm doing my hijack thing. So we did have a question earlier on, but I think this is a good time to ask it.
Sure.
Andy had early on had said, how is social emotional delay measured? And I'm not sure if you can speak to that a little bit during this process, because this is when it would come to play.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Deb. So social emotional has to be evaluated in much the same way that you would evaluate any other type of potential delay. So there are tools that districts can use to look at how your child is functioning compared to his peers. There's norm reference tools. There also might be an observation of your child or an interview with you, or if your child was in school with your child's teacher, but much in the same way that we're evaluating any other type of concern. I hope that answers that question. So just getting back to the purpose in this meeting, you will again have an opportunity, as will EI, to provide any necessary updates and to bring to the table any new evaluations that might have occurred. What happens if your child is eligible for special education? If your child is eligible, an IEP or an individual education program meeting is conducted and an IEP is developed within 15 school days. So once you're in the special ed world, we're either talking about calendar days or school days. And just wanted to alert you to that now. So we're talking about 15 school days or 3 weeks of school. So you will have this IEP meeting. You will be asked for another consent. So the first consent was required around evaluation. You're now going to be asked to sign consent for special education services, that initial provision of special education services. And without that, they will not be able to be delivered. In addition, EI will help you access any other supports that might be needed. So if your child is ineligible, what happens? So early intervention and the district will, as Jen mentioned earlier, will help support you in identifying any community-based resources that might be beneficial. We want you to know that even if your child is ineligible, that you can refer your child again if those concerns represent. But your child will be discharged from EI upon his or her 3rd birthday. RIPIN is always a good place to connect with if you have any other questions at that point, and your parent consultants may still be able to support your family. Deb, feel free to interrupt if there are more questions. What if families disagree with the eligibility determination? So we do find that most of the time families and LEAs or school districts are able to work together to work out differences in perspectives or opinions through a collaborative decision-making process. And we always would ask you to look to that collaboration first and to see if something can be figured out. So if we're receiving calls that there are problems, we're going to encourage you to communicate any concerns you have with the district representatives. So if maybe you have an early childhood coordinator at these meetings, you might want to contact the special education director in the district. Districts do want to help you. They want this to be a positive experience. So if you're unhappy or don't think your needs are met, please contact that district as a first step. If there are disagreements around evaluation, you can request an independent evaluation. The districts will be able to talk to you about what that looks like. In other words, finding someone outside of the school to evaluate your child. And if you disagree with the outcome of the eligibility determination, the districts are required to notify you of your rights. You have many rights at that time. And you'll be given paperwork to describe what all of those options are. So that's really what happens at the second meeting. As we mentioned, if your child is eligible for services, you would then go to the IEP meeting or the Individualized Education Program meeting. And I just wanted to reinforce what Jen had said earlier about the evaluation team meeting to determine the eligibility. Again, those are meetings to just say yes or no. Your child is eligible for special ed services, yes or no. It's not a time to say your child is eligible for speech services. Your child is eligible for a classroom. Because your child is eligible for under this category, you're getting this service or that service. All of those decisions are made at the end of the IEP meeting instead. So we'll talk about that now. So what is the timeline? So within 15 days of that special ed eligibility, 15 school days, I'm sorry, there will be an IEP meeting. Again, the participants are much the same. However, there may be fewer people at this meeting. So if there were psychologists or social workers at that the first 2 meetings, you might just have maybe a speech therapist, a special ed teacher, or a gen ed teacher at this meeting, but you are obviously a very important part of the IEP meetings as well. And the purpose is to create that IEP according to federal and state regulations and guidelines, including what we call FAPE. There's another acronym for you. So FAPE is a free and appropriate public education. So that refers to the special education and related services. All of those services are free to your child. And services in the LRE. And we're going to talk about that LRE, or least restrictive environment. So what does that IEP look like? If you haven't seen an IEP, I think in some ways it's similar to an IFSP that you've seen in early intervention, but it does look a little bit different. So the first part begins talking about what we call present levels of performance, and that is just where your child is right now, right? How he's functioning within his everyday environments. We then discuss goals for your child. So goals include where he's functioning now and where we want your child to be, typically by the end of the year. IEPs are usually generated for 1 year. And then objectives are a breakdown of those goals. So goals are really large and objectives will break it down into pieces, components, or a time frame. The IEP also includes the decisions regarding special education services and related services, as well as any supplemental aids and services that will all be discussed at the end of the IEP meeting after everything else has been determined. So we mentioned before LRE and least restrictive environment. It's really important that families do understand this concept. So LRE is part of the IDEA. It's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Again, more acronyms for you. The law that relates to special education services for children. And LRE says that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with children who are non-disabled. That special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from those regular education environments only occurs if the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in a regular class with the use of supplemental aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. That's a bit of a mouthful, but what it means is that we want children to have access to the same programs, the same classrooms as their peers. And children should not be removed from those general ed settings unless we can't determine and implement services and supplemental aids that can support your child in that setting. Children shouldn't be removed before we have considered what potential supplemental aids and services can be provided to your child in that gen ed setting for them to be successful. Again, with LRE, the IDEA or the special education law presumes that that first placement option considered for each child is the regular education classroom that the child would attend if he or she did not have a disability, with the addition of the appropriate supplemental aids and services. So we always want to start thinking about that regular education classroom, and it's important that we start thinking about that in preschool and not wait till the child is a little bit older. We've had this IEP meeting. We know what the goals are for your child. We know what services your child needs in order to reach those goals. We know what related services your child needs. Maybe those related services might be speech therapy or occupational therapy or transportation. Related services could be any number of things. But the bottom line is that we need to have your child in service by his 3rd birthday. So there are a few exceptions to that. So if your child was referred late to early intervention within 90 days of your child's 3rd birthday, the districts may need more time to get your child in service. If you opted out, as Jen mentioned before, and then opted back in, your child might not be in school right on his 3rd birthday, or in service, I should say. If your child turned 3, on a weekend or holiday or vacation, your IEP team might decide to have your child start after that school closing. If you didn't provide consent for the evaluation or the initial service, as we mentioned, again, that might delay the start of services, or if your family moved between districts, that also might cause a delay. Other than that, all children should be in service, the first service starting on their 3rd birthday. So finally, I just wanted to mention that each district requires a registration packet. Everything districts need to have your child in service in special education services. So we're asking you to think about this early, Potentially early intervention can help get the information that's needed, but your child will not be able to actually start school or start service until that registration packet is complete. So I think at this point, I'm turning it back to you, Jen.
Yes, you are. Thanks, Ruth. So this process, I know we just talked a lot about all the details about what's going to happen, but, the most important thing that I want to stress is that you as a parent have an incredibly important role throughout this entire process. And so we're going to just talk about what that might look like for you. So throughout this process, there's many things that you can do as a parent to work with your EI and school department team to make this as smooth as possible. One of the things that might be your role is to identify any early childhood programs in your community that you might be interested in looking into to see if it's a good fit for your child and your family. One thing that you can also do is really learn the differences between what early intervention is and what preschool special education services are, because they are different. There's a lot of resources that you can access for that, and your early intervention team can certainly help you. But the more you understand about the differences, I think that the process would be easier for you or more manageable for you. And always sharing what you know about your child's strengths, needs, functional skills, and behaviors. You are with your child, especially now during COVID, way more than anybody else is. And you see your child on a daily basis. You're watching them grow and learn and develop. And so you are an integral part to providing this information to the teams. But really importantly too, your role is to explain how your child learns best. What have you seen? What are some things that you do to help your child learn the things that he or she has learned? What motivates? What motivates one child is definitely different. Music motivates, little Johnny, but doing really good, big gross motor activities might motivate Susie, so we can't assume that all children are motivated by the same things, and you would be able to have that information. Representing your child's best interests, you are your child's voice and advocate. I think that's kind of a given here. And your opinion and your voice is extremely valued in this process. So never be quiet. Be part of the decision-making process. You are definitely part of this decision, and ask questions. No question is little. If you have a question, you don't understand that something during these meetings, during the process, you think of something in the middle of the night, call your EI service coordinator the next day. The more you ask, the more you're going to learn, and the more informed you will be. I think we have another slide. So, and the other thing you can do is making sure that you're really prepared for each meeting, and your early intervention team should help you do this. You can look through this family guide. There's a transition workbook that we have that should be provided to you, or that you can access on that Sherlock website that we posted the link earlier in the slides. One of the things is making sure you have all your paperwork ready. Any reports that you have, any documents, keep them nice and organized in a folder or a notebook. So if something's needed, you can just pull it right out and refer to it. Making sure that you discuss the agenda, what is the purpose of this next meeting? What are we going to be focusing on with your service coordinator, and ask any questions about that so that you feel really prepared. Think about what questions you might have that the service coordinator or someone on your EI team cannot answer, that might be able to be answered during that meeting, and write them down and bring them with you. So sometimes those meetings can be very overwhelming. Sometimes there's a lot of people sitting around the table, and I know when I get in that situation, even if I go to the doctor's office, I wanted to ask my doctor 5 things and I only asked 2 because I didn't write it down. So I think the best thing is to write down any questions that you might want asked. And you know what? Your questions might be answered. You might not even have to ask them, and you can check them off. But at least you have the information that you want to gain and what you want to get out of the meetings right in front of you. And we have, you know, our parent consultants at RIPIN have all been through this experience already. So if you would like to hear about somebody's experience and how that went for them, and, you know, what worked for them, and if they might have some tips or some tricks or some advice for you, so schedule with your parent consultant, have a little home visit or Zoom visit right now, and talk about that, and talk about, you know, anything that you want to regarding any of the meetings or anything during this process. Oh, back, yeah, there you go. And then when you get to the meetings, you know, you need to participate. We want you to participate in these conversations about your child. This is your child. You absolutely should speak up. You absolutely should, you know, talk about your child and share information. The best thing to do that helps people really understand your child is if you can provide some specific functional skills and behavior, some examples of, you know, if you say, oh, he or she has a really hard time when there's a lot of people around. Well, give an example about, hey, I went to this birthday party and this is what happened. So any kind of little story, any kind of little vignette that you can give about your child is really helpful, so that the team who may have not met your child can get to know them and have a nice picture of what's going on and what your needs might be. Listen to the perspective of others. Everybody, you're going to have people in the room that might have a different perspective. You can agree or you can disagree, but we always want to listen to each other in a meeting first. And that goes true for the other people in the room listening to your perspective as well. So we have to have that mutual listening. Keep the focus on your child. Make sure that that's where we're keeping our focus. And again, like I said, I cannot stress this enough. If you prepare ahead of time, these meetings will go so much more smoothly for you, and you will get the meeting agenda will be addressed. You will get your questions answered, and you know, be ready for the next step. And just always remembering, like, you know, this is your first experience with your local school department. So you're working towards building a positive relationship with your school. So anything that you can do, we have expectations of the team as well to be building a positive working relationship with you. And then you're working on having a positive relationship with them. All right, back to Ruth.
Okay, so this is our last section before we're going to open it up to questions. And I wanted to just quickly talk about what special education needs to do during the pandemic. Again, as Deb mentioned, we're not going to be able to focus on this today, but I wanted to highlight some key information for you. You'll also see a lot of information on the slides. We're not going to go over that in a lot of detail, but if you go to the RIPIN website, and I think Deb will give you some information on how that can be provided after, we will give you a copy of the PowerPoint so you can look this over. So the United States Department of Education has provided guidance for states and for school districts and families around what those services look like during the pandemic. And I wanted to just speak with you a little bit about that. So the first thing is that nobody knew this was going to happen, and that IDA wasn't designed around pandemics. And so therefore it does not specifically address the situation where schools and families found themselves in. But what we do know is that if an LEA closes entirely for all students, there is no responsibility to provide services for children with disabilities. So in other words, if no one's getting any type of schooling, there'll be no schooling for anybody. The LEAs need to make every effort to provide those services to children with disabilities once school resumes. However, if the school buildings are closed, but there's distance learning going on for the general student population, then the children with disabilities are entitled to those special education services, those free and appropriate public education services, as I mentioned before. So if there's any type of learning going on for all the kids, there are special education rights as well. So guidance from the United States Department of Education really around to the ensuring that SEAs and LEAs, so state education agencies, the Department of Education, and local education agencies, the school districts, must ensure to the greatest extent possible each child with a disability can be provided with the special ed and related services identified in the student's IEP. That does include the fact that some of those services needed to be provided through distance learning, through virtual or other ways during this pandemic, and that was obviously recognized by the US DOE. And that special education may need to look different during this time of national emergency, right? If kids aren't in classrooms, it's not going to look the same way that it has previously. So what about those IEPs? So first of all, IEPs can happen in person, or they can happen over video or over the telephone. There's lots of ways that IEPs can take place. The guidance from OSEP is that teams and parents should work together creatively to meet IEP timelines. So when IEPs are due, usually in that year, we want to make sure that we are meeting those timelines. And a little bit of information that we did get from the Department of Education around additional meetings, so that teams don't need to come back together and write full IEPs for distance learning. That if there's an IEP that's still in effect, that families and districts together can write a document, write something up to amend or modify the services for distance learning. Again, Department of Education is encourages parents, educators, and administrators to collaborate creatively to make this happen for kids. What do children need at this time, and how can we make it happen? Encouraging all to work together at this time. So in summary, couple takeaways. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is the law. It's still the law. Nothing has changed. Districts are making a good faith effort to meet the requirements for each child. The DOE asked districts and states to consider family preferences, advantages, disadvantages of moving forward virtually and what that looks like, to document team decisions, parents' choice. But parents still have their rights. And this is a link to the special education regulations, or on the RIDE Department of Education website. This is a link to all the resources if families disagree with any outcome of a special education meeting. And that's what I have. I think, Deb, we're going to turn it back over to you for questions.
Yeah, so I don't know, Mark, if you want to go ahead and unmute people's mics so that they can ask questions in real time. But I did have one clarifying question, which really, Ruth, you alluded to, but I think we need to clarify is one. Jen asked if Jen Franchetti asked if the timelines for transition from early intervention still need to be the same even during the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
nothing has changed there.
Right, it is under IDEA, and I think some people may not know that, so that was good. We also had some comments, more comments and observations from Sandy. And Sandy, I don't know if you're unmuted, if you wanted to just ask those live. She has a raised hand. I see that. So Sandy, are you on? Yeah, okay.
Sandy, you're unmuted now if you'd like to follow up.
Okay. I'm somebody who's been in the field of early childhood and mental health for about 45 years. I've been in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And I'm not satisfied with the social and emotional screening of kids in early childhood. I find that it's very hard to get schools to come out and observe kids in groups. And I've also found that there's this strange division in Rhode Island between social and emotional and behavioral interventions. And finally, I found that the recommendations of mental health practitioners who've worked with some kids, in some cases for months or years, get brushed aside by people who just meet them for 1 or 2 times. And so I'm not satisfied with the screenings that you folks use, and I'm wondering what's going to be done about that, whether this is a complaint that you're hearing from other folks.
Thanks for that question. And I understand. I've heard this concern. This is not the first time that we've heard this concern, and we've been working on this, and we'll continue to work on it. One of the things that we do is to share the requirements and the regulations with families and with providers so that they know what their rights are. I'm not sure if you're talking about screenings or assessment as part of the evaluation process. I assume you're talking about assessment as part of evaluation that we discussed. Is that right, Sandy?
Am I on again?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, all of the above.
So we've been working hard over the last, I don't know how many years to ensure that everyone understands that the social emotional domain is an important piece in a child's learning. It's one of those 5 areas that we consider as part of developmental delay. There have been some misunderstandings in the state, and I'm sure there still are some. It sounds like you're noticing some of those. I'm not sure exactly where to go with that, other than to follow the protocol that we suggested, speaking with someone else in the school department if your needs are not being met there, calling RIPIN and asking for assistance, or calling the Department of Education, calling the call center, because maybe there are pockets or certain districts that you're more concerned about than others. We have many, many initiatives around this. So without knowing exactly what you're speaking to, it's kind of hard to.
Ruth, do you want to speak to the recommendations that are coming out or are kind of out? And because we're recognizing, we also recognize that social, emotional, and behavioral, it shouldn't be separate. It's together. And then, I don't know, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
So many stakeholders around Rhode Island have worked for, well over a year to identify some of the challenges in this area and to put together a set of recommendations that were just endorsed at the Early Learning Council when COVID all kind of hits. But our next steps really are to look at those recommendations that were identified and put together some action steps to see some of this to fruition. So many of those action steps involved how do we support early childhood programs in understanding the need for social emotional development for children that had toxic experiences, the need for relationships, mental health perspective, and all of that. And how do we ensure that school districts are coming in and supporting children as that specialized instruction? So it's kind of a short answer. Deb, I don't know if RIPIN has that document on your website, or if we could also send that out along with this PowerPoint.
Yeah, we could go ahead and do that. I don't see why not. We don't have it posted on our website, but we could. I will do that. We'll make sure that whoever's on this call can go ahead and get that. We also had Naomi. She in the chat box said that she's sort of agrees. She's piggybacking on the social emotional piece. It's been harder to find children eligible in the social emotional criteria. I think that what we've noticed is that particularly if a child is on target cognitively, it's really hard if the issues are really social emotional and they are showing a delay in that area. But when that is the only area of delay or that's identified, it's hard for, I think, districts to recognize how much that's going to impact their ability to learn without supports.
So thanks, Deb. And Deb and Jen and I have talked about this for a number of years. This is not a new topic. As you saw when we were talking about the developmental disability category and eligibility, that all of those domains are equal. So cognition is the same as language, is the same as social emotional development. There's no difference. There's no distinction regarding eligibility. If the child is having significant needs in the social emotional area and the criteria is met, there's no need for a cognitive delay in addition to that. So we've been working with districts on how to identify that, on evaluation tools that they can use that would give them that norm reference information that they need. But if you are still seeing this, I highly suggest that you have families call the Department of Education, the call center, which is 222-8999, and talk to them about that, because districts should not be finding children ineligible if they meet the criteria for developmental delay. And I know that many districts have changed their practices. So if there's still some out there that we need to work with, then we're happy to do that.
Naomi also observed that during this COVID time that there has been a greater focus on all children's social and emotional well-being at this time. You know, so I think that actually may hold us in good stead for having some of these changes come down the pike a little faster. I had a couple questions that I know that we often get from parents that I thought that maybe I would just pose here, just in case anybody sort of thought it and didn't think to ask, is that, you know, when you're thinking about some of these meetings, you know, and parents sometimes are like not sure exactly what to expect, they're not sure who they can invite, who actually can come to some of these school meetings or the transition meeting. If the parent would like to invite somebody, are there any restrictions on that?
Yeah, the parent can certainly invite someone that knows their child well and someone that can contribute to the conversation. Absolutely.
Great. And I know, Jen, you mentioned that not all children are found eligible for an early childhood special education setting. Could you tell us about what is the percentage of children average-wise per year that actually are found eligible for special education?
For preschool special education services? Because you said a setting, so I want to make it clear that we're talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, not
That's okay. I
necessarily.
just want to make it clear what we're talking about. About 60% of children who are in early intervention at age 3 move on to preschool special education, and about 40% of them do not. They move on to other wonderful things.
So
I think it's important that, Jen, if I could Deb, add to what Jen said, I think it's important that we think about kind of the North Star, which is your child and your child's education. And special education may or may not be necessary, but we all want the same things for our children. So many children may not require special education services, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. We want all children to have access to high quality early childhood services. So whether they need supports or not, I think the goal is for all children to be a part of that educational community and learning and reaching the goals that we have for all children. I think sometimes we feel like if a child's ineligible, it's a bad thing, and that's not always the case. Of course, if you disagree, parents absolutely have their rights at that point.
And just to piggyback on both of those things is that when, you know, I was a parent consultant many years ago, and I remember sitting with families, and they had heard from somebody else that they know that had a child with a similar diagnosis, that they were placed in a certain setting that they thought was just perfect for their child. And so they have come to the meeting with that idea that that's where their child should be. They should be in a setting. And I know you've spoken to that, you know, special education is not a place, it's specialized instruction. So I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, is how, as we as family members can be prepared to go in there, but also for the professionals on this call, I think sometimes families have received information about what their child should be eligible for before even the eligibility meeting. What advice would you give both to parents and to the professionals as a family is preparing to be able to hear what the options are and not to go in with preconceived ideas?
Well, a few things, Deb. You know, one, as you can see in this presentation, we talked a lot about where your child might be. If your child did not have a disability, did you have a positive experience at Head Start? Did you have a positive experience at another early childhood program with siblings, with your other children? we want you to plan for that and not wait for the special education eligibility and IEP to see if your child is eligible for a classroom. We should be making decisions, based on what's good for all kids. And by the time we get to that IEP meeting, if in fact your child does need something different other than a general early childhood setting, that absolutely will still be on the table and that will be discussed if it's appropriate for your child. But that those special education classrooms aren't always the way to go. We want children to have access to that general ed curriculum. What we find is that the more children have access to what all children have, the better the chances are that the child will continue to kindergarten and first grade and second grade in those general education environments with the supports that they need. For kids that are placed in special education classrooms when they're very young, what we tend to see is that trajectory is followed throughout schooling. So I encourage everyone to think about those general education opportunities in their communities and to think about special education as a service to support your child and to ensure your child's success in those general education settings.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, I know there was one other one too, is that you had mentioned that, Ruth, I think that if a child is not found eligible for special education, specialized instruction at this time, where would a parent go if they found concerns later? What would they do?
They definitely can re-refer their child. So they could contact the school department. We have those contact numbers on our website, on the RIDE website, and Deb, maybe we should share that as well. You contact your school department, just ask for that early childhood coordinator or the special ed director if need be, and say that you'd like to put in a referral for your child. And that's okay. If it's 4 months later, or if it's 6 months later, or a year later, whatever it is, if you're concerned, we want you to put in another referral.
Can you also speak to the child outreach programs that each local education agency has?
Sure. So part of another obligation under the special education law is something called Child Find. So Child Find is like it sounds. It's the responsibility of school districts to find children with disabilities or developmental delays. In Rhode Island, for 3 to 5 year olds, we call this child outreach screening, or a piece of it is child outreach screening. The goal of the screening system is to screen all children at 3, all children at 4, and all children at 5, and to see if there are any red flags. So this is just a simple screening, I think of it as like sifting kids with sand and identifying kids that may have a disability or delay that we'd want to look a little bit more. So any child that doesn't pass that child outreach screen with parent permission would be referred to special education automatically. So it's a really good thing to do to ensure that your child has a child outreach screening every year, 3, 4, and 5 prior to kindergarten, just to make sure that your child is functioning where he or she should be for his age.
Thank you, Ruth.
Sure.
So are there any other questions? I see, Jen, that you've answered, a question directly in the chat, so we won't go there. Are there any other questions that you have? If there's none now, you'll see that my email is up here, is maslin@ripin.org. If you want any follow-up and you would like to contact me directly, and I will, if your question really belongs with Ruth or Jen, I will pass that along. But I can also connect you with a little bit more information about our parent consultant program and all those other things too. As you can see in the slide now, this is our RIPIN contact information. In the chat, please look at, Mark has put some information. This will be recorded. This is recorded, and so it will be posted on our website eventually. Mark, how long does it take for these recordings to be available?
Recording will be available as soon as the webinar is concluded on our YouTube channel, and everybody in attendance will get an email with the link to access the recording.
Okay.
And then it'll show up on our website probably in the next day or two.
Okay, perfect. And if somebody would like the PowerPoint email to them, sent to them directly, just let me know at maslin@ripin.org. I know that there were some embedded links in there if you were looking for them. And so we can do that as well. I think that might be it.
Deborah, there's one more question. I think it's for Ruth in the question and
I see the
answer.
question.
Just
Yeah.
want to make sure we get that.
Okay, how is outreach screenings, how are they being conducted? This is from Deb Newell. How are outreach screenings being conducted during COVID?
Yeah, so in fact, tomorrow I have a meeting with all of the child outreach coordinators in the state, and we have a provisional child outreach system ready to roll out within a week, I would say. And that allows for really working with the family instead of working with children in person. As typically in the child outreach screening process, we have identified high quality, valid questionnaires. So districts will be working with families to send questionnaires around general development and social emotional development. We have some new checklists for vision and hearing, and that will all go out to the parent directly. We have some new portals where everything can be completed online. So you should expect to hear about that if you have a 3, 4, or 5-year-old.
Great question. Is there anything else? Oh, another one popped up. Let's see. What should parents look for? Naomi's asking, what should parents look for when considering if a child needs early intervention? Jen?
I would say if you're a parent and you're wondering if your child needs early intervention, you should just call early intervention and they will help you figure out if that is a needed services. What will happen is you can refer yourself to any of the EI programs. And if you have concerns about your child, you can discuss that with early intervention. They will do an eligibility assessment to see if your child's eligible for early intervention services and discuss with you, you know, what are your needs and what supports early intervention can provide to help help you with your child's development. So I would say if you're questioning it, I'd rather you call and then have them say, you're not eligible for early intervention, but here's another resource for you, than for you to sit at home and wonder.
And Jen, you can find the contact information and the areas covered by each of the 9 EI agencies on the Sherlock site. Is that correct?
It's also on the EOHHS website, but a parent can also email me. That my email address is there. I get emails from parents all the time saying, I'm interested in early intervention. Who should I call? And so then I usually will help them find a provider and give them that list and some information. Right. I'm happy to do that.
Is your email there, Jen?
Is our emails at the beginning?
Yeah, the email's at the beginning.
Sorry, I'm making everyone dizzy.
Yeah, and you can also email me if it's easier.
See them.
I put it in the chat box also. It's in the chat box. So
okay.
It's a pretty easy thing. So Deb is asking Ruth for you to contact her directly. Deb Newell.
What's that? I'm sorry, Deb.
Deb Newell is asking if you can contact her directly. Deb, could you just email Ruth if we can put that slide up with just the email addresses, and then Deb, you can email Ruth directly and ask those questions.
Okay. So we don't have a slide with it, so I'm going to put it into the chat.
I think we do at the very beginning.
So the other thing that I just want to say, if I can put in a little plug here, since we have a minute, is for all of the professionals who are online right now on this webinar, please spread the word that early intervention is open. We never closed. We are doing what we can virtually to help support families. So please continue to refer to early intervention. The early intervention programs will discuss with the family how EI services are being provided right now and give families that option. And so there's a little bit of a myth out there that EI is not open, and we are certainly open. We never closed, and all programs are can receive referrals at this time.
And I am wrong, the email address was not on the beginning slide, your names. but
Just popped it in my email address into the chat, incorrectly first and then correctly, but Deb knows my email. So Deb, contact me just so I don't forget.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, contact me and I will direct you to the right person. I probably will not be the right person, or I might be, who knows? So we are at the 4-minute mark before we're done. We really appreciate all of you who have been participating in this. Again, questions sometimes come up later. And there has been a request for us to email the slides just out to everybody. Mark, is that possible? Okay, so Mark, you'll take care of doing that, as well as I will send Mark the new recommendations that that have come out more recently regarding social emotional support in classrooms for all children. And so we'll send that out along with this.
And you know what? I will pop in our emails before we send it out. That way we'll have them on that second slide.
Oh, good idea. All right. So if that's, oh, it looks like there's one more question in under the wire. Oh, just sure. Okay. She's just answering. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining us. Everybody have a great day and stay safe.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.